Hi there, I'm certified financial planner Wes Caprill, and this is Wealth Wise Women, the show that's rewriting the narrative that personal finance and investing are just for men and just for insiders. Because whether or not the rest of my industry realizes it, the future of wealth in the United States is female, and I aim to foster that future one episode at a time. So join me as I attempt to add humor and entertainment to the otherwise snooze fest that is personal finance, addressing along the way various topics from the lens of how they affect women in particular. And if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to our channel and our newsletter, the link to which you can find in the episode details. That being said, let's get to this week's episode. Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Wealth Wise Women podcast. I've decided that for the next few weeks, I'm going to discuss topics that aren't necessarily controversial in nature, but they do elicit some polarizing responses and opinions. Now, maybe I'm just being contrarian as of late or feeling contrarian, but I think it's important that somebody play devil's advocate when it comes to popular trends or fads, especially in the personal finance space. If you want to catch more detail, be sure to listen to this episode on Apple, where you can catch the full-length version. Now, my first target is the FIRE movement. For those of you who don't know what that is, FIRE stands for Financially Independent Retired Early. Now, this movement really gained steam around 2010 and has been heavily championed by the millennial generation. At face value, FIRE makes a lot of sense. It's all about aggressively saving early on in your career so that you can retire early. In some cases, as early as 35 years old. And that should be heavily celebrated. I mean, I love the idea of a mindset that's all about saving as much as possible and being smart with your spending. There are always downsides to things. And I think when you dig a little bit deeper into what FIRE is all about, I think that it's not going to work for the vast majority of people. First and foremost, frankly, the math around FIRE is unrealistic for the average person. FIRE requires saving about 50 to 70% of your income, and that's impossible for many people, particularly those who might have modest incomes, live in high cost of living areas, or have families. I mean, if you have children, you're probably not going to be able to do FIRE, at least in its current form. And the movement assumes a smooth path to this financial independence. I've talked a lot about how we want everything to be linear, and FIRE kind of assumes this linear trajectory of savings. And it doesn't really take into account unexpected life events like illness, job loss, or family emergencies. Now, it's quite possible you are a fortunate person who doesn't run into any roadblocks, and that's great. But if you do, FIRE does not allow for any flexibility to account for that. Depending on some sources, 68% of Americans don't have enough savings to last even 1 month if they lost their income. So FIRE for the average person just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's another thing that's not often talked about, and that's isolation and a crisis of identity. Early retirees face significant social isolation since most of their peers are still working. A lot of that really was evident when the pandemic came about and people were isolated in their homes. FIRE kind of promotes a similar thing where you're leaving the workforce early, and there aren't many people who are young who are also leaving the workforce. So you do all of a sudden have this isolation. And then leaving a career forces people to redefine their identity without that job title. Now, I don't think that our job should be our identity in the first place, but when you all of a sudden don't have a career anymore and you're retired early, you do have this sort of identity. Now, FIRE does talk about now being able to pursue whatever work it is that's meaningful to you, but you need to go into it with that understanding that you're going to have to redefine yourself when you do retire early. And so there is a lot of purpose hopelessness that persists for some FIRE followers. So it's important to realize that, while retiring early is something that I think a lot of people aspire to, they don't necessarily understand what it means. It's kind of like the dog chasing a car. They're chasing it, but all of a sudden, let's say they catch the car, they wouldn't really know what to do with it then at that point. So if you are somebody who does want to retire early, part of what we help with when it comes to financial planning is, what is it that you're going to do in retirement? Do you have a bucket list in place? And then do you have kind of the right mindset to be able to then achieve that bucket list and not live in fear, if you will, of outliving your money? When you have this ultra frugal mindset, it can be hard to then say, okay, I can spend my money comfortably. That's something that you need to manage when it comes to prepping for retirement. So ultimately, I do feel that there are better alternatives that you can pursue. Don't get me wrong, FIRE is a noble endeavor for some people, and I think it's great to always have that mindset of saving money and spending wisely. But I think it's also very important that you focus on flexibility rather than early retirement per se. So build wealth, certainly, but do it in a way that leaves you with options. You don't necessarily all of a sudden have to retire at 35 and never work again. I think it's important to view wealth as a tool to be able to say, okay, I can go do what I want. I'm not necessarily wealthy to be able to never work again, but put yourself maybe in a position to take a couple years off and do what it is that you've always wanted to do and experiment a little bit and say, you know what, in a couple of years, I'll go rejoin the workforce. So again, maybe view it as a means towards flexibility in maybe the midterm, not necessarily full retirement in the long term. Again, I'm not knocking FIRE entirely and saying that it is a fully flawed methodology. But again, I think it's important. It's like a diet. It might work for some people, but for most people, I don't think it will work. And I think there's things that we can take from it and build into kind of a comprehensive, holistic plan that gives you flexibility and financial freedom in the long term, rather than saying, I'm going to live like a Spartan for 10 years and then retire. Instead, it's, let's find a life of balance. I think that's a very noble thing to aspire to, living a balanced life. So if that's what you're looking for, shoot me a note or book a time with me. Visit withmc.com. Would love to sit down with you and discuss how we can help you put together a well-balanced plan for a long-term, secure financial future. That being said, hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.